She lost everything: her safety, her comfort, her certainty about tomorrow. But she did not lose her courage. And that single truth is where this story begins. Because when everything familiar is stripped away, what remains reveals who we truly are. Today, I invite you to listen not just with your ears, but with your hearts, because this is not only her story, it is a reflection of what courage looks like when life gives no mercy and no shortcuts. There was a moment when the world she trusted collapsed without warning. Dreams she carefully built shattered in silence. Support she depended on disappeared. The future she imagined vanished almost overnight. Many would have surrendered at that point. Many would have allowed fear to write the rest of their story. But here is the hook: she didn't. Even when her hands were empty, her spirit was not. Even when her voice shook, she spoke. Even when hope felt distant, she chose to stand. Courage, as I have learned through countless brave women's stories, is not loud. It does not always arrive with applause or recognition. Sometimes courage looks like waking up when you feel broken. Sometimes it looks like taking one step forward when your heart begs you to stop. She cried, yes, but she did not quit. She doubted herself, but she did not retreat. Each setback tested her, but each test strengthened a part of her she didn't know existed. When everything else was taken, courage became her shelter. It guided her through uncertainty. It taught her to rebuild, not from comfort, but from conviction. She learned that losing everything does not mean losing yourself. In fact, sometimes it is only after losing everything that you finally meet the strongest version of who you are meant to be. When everything else was taken from her, courage remained, and that alone changed the meaning of loss. At the moment when comfort disappeared and familiar ground collapsed beneath her feet, she discovered something extraordinary. Courage does not require security to exist. It shows up precisely when security is gone. This is the part of the story most people overlook, yet it is where true strength is revealed. Because when support systems fall away and expectations shatter, what stays behind is not accident, it is character. She stood in a space where certainty no longer lived. The people she once relied on were no longer present. The future she planned for no longer made sense, and the confidence she once borrowed from circumstances had evaporated. Yet here is the hook. She did not wait for reassurance to move forward. She did not wait for permission to believe in herself. Courage stepped in where validation ended. And that courage was not dramatic or fearless. It was quiet, steady, and deeply intentional. Many assume courage means the absence of fear, but brave women's stories teach us otherwise. Courage is choosing to act while fear is present. She felt fear, doubt, and hesitation, yet none of them were allowed to make her decisions. Instead, she learned to stand without guarantees. Each step forward was taken without knowing the outcome, but with complete trust in her inner strength. This is what separated her from defeat. She trusted herself when there was nothing else left to trust. As a stories expert, I can tell you this moment is where transformation begins. When everything external is stripped away, courage becomes your internal compass. It becomes the voice that says, "You are still capable," even when the world says otherwise. She learned that loss does not equal emptiness. In fact, loss creates space. Space for resilience, clarity, and self-respect to rise. Her courage became a daily choice, not a one-time decision. Some days it looked like getting out of bed when grief felt heavy. Other days it meant refusing to return to environments that once broke her. Each choice reinforced a powerful truth. She was not defined by what she lost, but by what she refused to lose. And in that refusal, she claimed her power, not from what remained around her, but from what remained within her. Pain entered her life uninvited, and when it did, it tested every belief she held about her own strength. Loss, betrayal, disappointment, and exhaustion arrive not one at a time, but all at once, as they often do in the lives of brave women. This is where many expect the story to end in defeat. But here is the turning point. Pain did not break her, it shaped her. Instead of allowing suffering to define her limits, she allowed it to refine her character. There were moments when the weight felt unbearable, when the silence was louder than words, and when the easiest option would have been to give up. Yet even in those moments, something powerful was happening beneath the surface. Pain was teaching her endurance. Every tear she cried carried information. Every disappointment revealed what no longer served her. This is a truth I have seen repeatedly as a stories expert. Pain is not only something to survive, it is something that prepares you. She began to understand that strength is not formed during comfort, it is forged during resistance. Each challenge demanded that she grow beyond the version of herself that once depended on ease and approval. Pain forced her to slow down, reflect, and rebuild her mindset. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" she began asking, "What is this teaching me?" That shift changed everything. What once felt like punishment became preparation. Her scars, both visible and invisible, stopped being sources of shame. They became symbols of survival. She no longer hid the fact that she had been hurt, because she realized that healing does not require forgetting. It requires understanding. Pain stripped away illusions and revealed truth. It showed her who stood with her, who walked away, and most importantly, who she could become when she stopped running from discomfort. The most powerful transformation occurred when she stopped trying to avoid pain and started walking through it with purpose. Pain no longer controlled her decisions, it informed them. It sharpened her intuition, strengthened her boundaries, and deepened her compassion, not only for others, but for herself. This is the quiet power of brave women. They do not deny their suffering, they use it. And through that use, pain becomes a teacher, shaping a woman who is not just strong, but unbreakable. There comes a moment in every brave woman's journey when silence feels safer than truth, when staying still seems easier than stepping forward. She reached that moment too. Fear whispered that speaking up would cost her more than staying quiet ever did. Doubt warned her that action might expose her weakness. But here is where her story shifts. She chose action over silence and strength over fear. Not because she felt ready, but because she refused to remain invisible in her own life. As a stories expert, I have seen how silence slowly erodes confidence. It convinces women that endurance means endurance without voice. She once believed that staying quiet was survival, that avoiding conflict was wisdom. Yet the longer she remained silent, the smaller her world became. Fear thrives in stillness, and she recognized that waiting for fear to disappear was a losing strategy. Instead, she learned to move with fear present, to let courage speak louder than hesitation. Her first act of courage was not dramatic. It was a choice, a decision to say what needed to be said, to take a step that had been postponed for too long. Her voice trembled, her hands shook, but she spoke anyway. That moment mattered more than she realized, because every time she acted despite fear, she weakened fear's control over her future. Action became her rebellion against doubt. Strength, she learned, is built through repetition. Each small action reinforced her belief in herself. Each refusal to retreat reminded her that she was capable of more than fear suggested. Silence had once protected her from judgment, but action gave her something greater: self-respect. She no longer waited to be understood before moving forward. She moved forward because she understood herself. What makes this point powerful is not the absence of fear, but the presence of choice. She chose not to let fear decide her boundaries. She chose to participate fully in her own life. Action transformed her identity from someone who endured quietly into someone who stood deliberately. And this is the truth woven through brave women's stories everywhere. Courage is not a feeling you wait for, it is a decision you make. Each time she chose action, she reclaimed her power, proving that strength grows the moment silence ends. Before she could rebuild her life, she had to rebuild herself. When everything she once depended on crumbled, she realized that survival was not enough. She needed to reclaim her identity, her voice, and her vision for the future. This is where most people stop and ask, how can someone start over when they have lost so much? The answer is deceptively simple. You start with who you are, not what surrounds you. And that is exactly what she did. She began by looking inward, confronting the parts of herself that fear and circumstance had tried to bury. She asked difficult questions. Who am I when no one else is watching? What do I truly value? What do I refuse to compromise, no matter the pressure? These reflections were not easy. They demanded honesty, courage, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. But as she peeled back layers of doubt and expectation, she discovered something remarkable. Her inner strength was far greater than she had ever imagined. Rebuilding herself was an active process, not a passive one. She nurtured her skills, reinforced her self-respect, and set boundaries that protected her growth. She stopped seeking validation from others and began trusting her own judgment. Each decision, no matter how small, became a brick in the foundation of the woman she was becoming. And here is the hook. This foundation was unshakable because it was built on understanding, not circumstance. While the world around her remained unpredictable, her core remained steady. She also learned the power of vision. Before attempting to reconstruct her life, she imagined what a life aligned with her values and purpose would look like. She held that vision close, letting it guide her choices. With each step, she tested her limits, celebrated small victories, and refined her approach. Rebuilding herself first meant she would never again allow external loss to define her. She discovered that success is not merely about recovering what was lost, but about creating something stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Her story shows that the most powerful transformations begin from within. When she rebuilt her identity, her confidence, and her purpose, everything else eventually followed. Life did not hand her stability, security, or recognition immediately, but it gave her something far more valuable: clarity, strength, and unshakable self-belief. And as a stories expert, I can tell you this: any woman who takes the time to rebuild herself first lays the groundwork for a life that cannot be broken, no matter what challenges remain ahead. And this is why her story matters. Because courage is not reserved for the fearless. It belongs to those who choose to rise despite fear. Her journey reminds us that even when life empties our hands, it cannot empty our hearts unless we allow it to. She lost everything except her courage, and that courage became enough to begin again. So if you are standing in the ruins of something you once believed in, remember this: what remains inside you is more powerful than what you lost. Courage does not erase pain, but it transforms it into purpose. And as long as courage lives within you, your story is not over. In fact, it may just be beginning.